Right, fans, just wanted to come online this morning and do a quick reaction video to the new UFC META Rankings. The UFC is now using META to provide an additional rankings in each of their divisions to remove some of the subjectivity and bias. And I think this is really interesting, and I'm a bit indifferent about, having additional rankings. I think that potentially adds a layer of confusion. But I do think there's a good argument to make about the UFC having these types of rankings, which uses meta to remove that bias. You could argue that a couple fights this year have actually been awarded to fighters based on popularity more so than merit. So actually having these rankings, which will focus more on the quality of opponents and the activity of fighters, is a good thing. This is going to be a lifetime reaction. It's the first time I've seen these rankings. So let's switch off the current rankings and go to the Meta rankings, which you see on your screen now. So you can first and foremost see that the pound for pound rankings have been removed. So there is no pound for pound rankings, apparently, according to the Meta UFC rankings. As for flyweight, yeah, not too many surprises from what I can see here. I think Pantoja being number one makes the most sense, given that he's been a champion and had a good reign. Mano Cup coming off of that win over Horiguchi probably is the next in line after Pantoja, or maybe gets a title shot before Pantoja, depending on Pantoja's injury. Tatsuro Taira, maybe a bit fortunate to be still so high, given that he lost to the champion Joshua Van. And then I'm looking at the rest of these rankings. I don't see too many decisions, so fair play. We'll give that one a pass. As for bantamweight, again, I think similar to flyweight, Marab Darvishvili is a long-term champion who recently lost the belt. He deserves to be number one and probably gets a rematch in his next fight back. It's interesting because you've got Nurmagomedov and O'Malley, who are second and third respectively. I think both of those fighters have a good case for a title shot after recent wins. I would say Nurmagomedov deserves to be second over O'Malley because he's on a longer winning streak, and he's not had as many title shots as O'Malley has for the belt. So even though O'Malley's coming off a bigger win in terms of the profile of event at Freedom 250, I think Nurmagomedov probably is a more deserving contender. Having him second over O'Malley makes a lot of sense to me. The rest of the rankings, I think they look fairly standard. Not too many complaints there. Interestingly, there's only 12 fighters ranked in these META UFC rankings for the bantamweight division. So it looks like they aren't just going to fill up the 15 spots for the sake of it. And they've done the same thing for featherweight, which has only 13 fighters ranked in that division. Volkanovski, obviously the champion. We are expecting him to fight Movsar Evliwev in his second title defense in this current reign. Diego Lopez, number two over Lerone Murphy. I'm not sure how I feel about that, to be honest. I know Lopez is coming off of a big win at Freedom 250, but I do think Lerone Murphy, even though he lost that fight against Evliwev, he was undefeated. He was on a very impressive run. He was looking like actually he deserves a title shot himself. I would argue there's a good case for Lerone to be number two. Aljamain Sterling at number four, I think it's fairly solid. He's someone who certainly, is a legend in this game, but also has a potential title shot down the line if he can keep up this good run. Interesting to see Arnold Allen above Gene Silva, and I actually think that's a really good pick. I would favor Arnold Allen being above Gene Silva. Arnold Allen is perhaps quite underappreciated. He gets a lot of wins over good fighters, and the only time he loses fights is against elite competition. So I actually think this is a really solid pick for him to be number five. And then John Silver, number six, obviously still very relevant in this division. And yeah, Aaron Pico, number 13. I think that's, somebody who could climb up these rankings, came to the UFC with a big ceiling, but rightfully not higher than that after recently getting his first win against Patricio Pitbull in the UFC. And then at lightweight, so Justin Gaethje, the new champion, Ilia Topuria stays at number one despite losing. I think that makes sense. When a champion loses his title, usually you place him at number one automatically. But then the real number one contender in terms of who actually gets the title shot next is Sarukian. He's rightfully at number two. Hopefully, these rankings will actually affirm that he gets a title shot, because I think that's a fight the UFC needs to make. They've been pulling off giving Sarukian a title shot for a long time, but that's highly deserved. Um, and then Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, Benoit Saint Denis. These are fighters who are very relevant at this current time. And then I think where it gets more interesting is you can see Paddy Pimlet's taking a bit of a hit. He's now number 9 in these rankings, after that loss earlier this year to Justin Gaethje. He is fighting Benoit Saint Denis over the summer, so that's possibly a fight that, with a win, will get him higher in the rankings. But a lot of people would probably have Paddy higher. Let's see where he's ranked in the actual rankings that the UFC were using previously. He was ranked number 6, so the fact that he's got a lower ranking, I think, is reflective of the fact that there is maybe a popularity bias. And don't get me wrong, Paddy Pimlet is a fantastic fighter, but I think probably there's a lot of popularity bias that goes into when we think about certain fighters, and you could argue he's one of them. And then welterweight, I'm really intrigued to see this welterweight division. Okay, so Makhachev champion, they've put Carlos Prates as number 1 over Gary. I don't agree with that, I have to say. I would argue Carlos Prates is probably a solid number 2 over Michael Morales, because he's beaten better opposition than Michael Morales. I don't think he's number 1 over Gary, though. I mean, Gary has beaten Prates not that long ago. And Gary's been fairly active, to be fair. So I think that's a very contentious decision. I know Prates has been more active than Gary, but I think Gary should be number 1 in my opinion. I mean, this is irrelevant in terms of who gets the next title shot, because we know Makhachev and Gary are filing next month. And then, Morales number 3, Jack Del Maddalena number 4. That's quite fortunate in my opinion. I mean, he's coming off of a couple losses. I think there's a case to make that, someone like Sean Brady, who's won his last fight, Gabriel Bonfim, who's on a good run, could be, rightfully above that Della Maddalena. I guess because JDM's a former champion, and because he's a former champion quite recently, that's why he's still quite high. And then Bilal Muhammad's still number 7. I think that's quite fortunate. Okay, they've not put... Oh, they have. They've put Yaroslav Amazov, number 15, which I suppose I do understand, because Amazov's only been in the UFC for 2 fights. He's won both those 2 fights. I mean, he hasn't faced elite competition, but I guess because he is... he's only lost 1 fight in his entire career. He's a former Bellator champion. It looks like they're disregarding a lot of that, which is fair enough. But in the actual UFC normal rankings, if you like, where is Amazov ranked? He is ranked number 11, so he is a bit higher. And then, I'm not sure. I think Amazov should be higher personally for winning his first 2 fights in the UFC. I mean, he's beat Neil Magny, who is a fairly reputable fighter, albeit not like one of the elite. He's a gatekeeper. They put MVP at number 12, which I think is fair. I think MVP definitely needs to step up. He's been active since he joined the UFC. He needs to be going out there against someone, maybe MVP versus Buckley or MVP versus Edwards in the UK could be a really interesting fight. Maybe MVP versus Muhammad. I think MVP certainly needs to fight somebody in that top 10, because with the exception of Ian Gary, he's won all of his fights. And Ian Gary at that point was, on the rise. But I think, MVP, even though he's not knocking people out, to add to that archive of elite knockouts that he had in Bellator, he's still winning fights. I think you've got to probably give him a top opponent at some point soon. And then middleweight. So Sean Strickland champion, Khamzat number 1, fair enough. I would say maybe Imanov above DDP would be the rightful thing on merit. Imanov, it's an interesting one, because I think Imanov, he's won his last fight. DDP has lost his last fight. So I would personally say Imanov should be number 2 over DDP. Brendan Allen, number 4, I think makes sense. He's not the most flashy fighter. He probably gets overlooked because of the fact he's not um, that explosive. But he is winning fights. Let's give him his credit. He is winning fights. So the fact to pull him above someone like Caio Borralho is really interesting. Is he above Borralho in the actual rankings? He is just by one place. You can see the order here gets a bit confusing on the website as well, because without having the pound for pound rankings, when you switch off to the meta rankings, the order gets a bit clogged up and you've got to really figure out where you are. So from an accessibility point of view, this is a bit interesting presentation from the UFC. Adesanya number 8, I think, is quite fortunate given the run he's been on. But you got some real up and comers there like Leroy Duncan and Bo Nickel who are on the rise. Really interesting to see Reina Dorida at number 15, but there are rumours that he now goes up to light heavyweight, so that potentially becomes less relevant for him. But I mean, his fall has taken a stock because a lot of people felt that he was destined to be a title challenger in the UFC. And then light heavyweight. So they've still got Pereira ranked. That's interesting. And Kalayev number 2, which I think is fair. He's only lost to Pereira, former champion as well. Yuri's number 3, which I think makes sense. Paulo Costa number 4. I'm finding the whole Paulo Costa narrative quite interesting because he's on a 2-fight winning streak. One of those fights was at middleweight before he came up to light heavyweight and beat, admittedly, an undefeated Azamat Murakanov. But I think the fact that he's number 4 and already being spoken about as a title challenger is quite fortunate for Paulo Costa. Nothing against him. I don't want to knock the guy, but that's just how I feel. And it might be because a lot of these guys in light heavyweight have already fought for the title and been unsuccessful in recent time. So, Jemiah Hill, a former champion, fought for the title, been unsuccessful. The same for Roundtree Jr., the same for Reyes. Albeit Reyes fought John Jones quite a while ago. But I think he has had a title eliminator fight, which he came up short in. Oh my gosh, look at that. Jan Blachowicz is all the way at 15. I mean, that's something we didn't think we would see. And he's number 4 in the actual rankings. That's very, very contrasting. Very, very contrasting indeed. And then heavyweight. So Tom Aspinall, obviously champion. Cyril Gane number 1. That makes the most sense. Volkov number 2. Pavlovich number 3. Josh Hockett number 5. I think that makes sense. No real complaints from what I can see at heavyweight. I think this is the division which is starting to slowly build some top tier contenders. With the rise of Josh Hockett, that's promising. I think Josh Hockett being number 5 makes sense given that he's won his fights in the UFC, particularly the last couple against top tier competition. And then the women's divisions, Mackenzie Dern at champion. They've still got Zhang Weili as the number 1 strawweight ranking, which I think makes sense. I'm surprised that Gillian Robertson is number 4 because she's getting the next title shot, and deservedly so in my opinion. I think the next title shot should have 100% been her or Zhang Weili. But they've got a couple fighters above her. So Werner and Tatiana Suarez are above her, which I find interesting. To be honest, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Robertson she's number 5 in the rankings. So even though she's getting a title shot, neither of the rankings really rank her that favourably, which is quite fascinating to see. Then the rest of the rankings, I think, makes a lot of sense. This is probably a division which does need some new contenders. So let's see what happens there. Flyweight, Shevchenko champion, as we know. Natalia Silva, hopefully the next number 1 contender for that fight, and the rankings suggest that she's definitely the person who deserves a title shot next, in my opinion. And then I think some of these other fighters in this division have been around for a bit longer. Some more familiar names. Rose Namajunas back at number 7. She's obviously been a champion in flyweight before, but she's getting to grips in this division. That's interesting to see. Not too many other surprises there, to be honest. I think this is a division which probably needs some new challengers, simply because Valentina Shevchenko has been so dominant in this division. And then women's bantamweight, Kayla Harrison champion. These rankings, I suppose, are somewhat irrelevant given that Amanda Nunes will get the next title shot. Nunes coming out of retirement. She's not ranked from what I can see, which makes sense. Again, I think this is a division which could do with some contenders. So let's hope that women's bantamweight provides some new contenders after the Nunes and Harrison fight. It will be interesting to see who gets that first fight against the champion after that fight. So those are the rankings. Interesting that they don't have a pound for pound, but I think the pound for pound can sometimes put a bit of bias into things. I think the existing rankings were good, but probably, we did have guys who were leaning towards the top for popularity. And there are some significant, changes compared to the new meta rankings. I mean, Jan Blachowicz being the obvious one, moving from the top 5 to 15. Was he top 5? Let me just remind myself. Yeah, he was 4th in the rankings, and he's 15. Wow, that's a big drop. Paddy Pimlet as well. Popularity perhaps was doing him favors. Paddy's a great fighter, don't get me wrong, but I think number 9 probably makes the most sense given that he was winning fights, but he was winning fights against lesser tier competition and lost his last fight against Justin Gaethje for the interim title in a fight which I think he was quite fortunate to be booked in. And I like Paddy, don't get me wrong, but I like him for the same reasons everyone else likes him, because he's funny, he's popular. But in terms of elite level MMA, if we're looking at who deserves to be in the top 10 or the top 5 rather, I would say these guys probably are above Paddy in that sense. Paddy can definitely get there, don't get me wrong. I just think he needs to beat a couple more guys to get back into true title contention. Um, yeah, some really interesting makings there. What I'm not quite clear on is what happens with these rankings. What are the UFC going to do with these rankings? Do we just have these rankings for the sake of it and they still make title fights which dismiss merit? We'll wait and see. But these are the new META UFC rankings. Let me know what you think about these in the comments. Any big surprises? Any things that I've overlooked? Thank you for watching.